From the heartland of America and the gateway to the West, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Norrie, and this is Coast to Coast AM. Later tonight, Hauntings. Here's what's happening. U.S. President Joe Biden took to the airwaves tonight, asking Americans to spend an additional $100 billion to help Israel fight Hamas, while Israel's defense chief told his troops to get ready to go into the Gaza Strip to destroy the militant group. In a televised White House speech that also addressed Ukraine's efforts to repel Russia's invasion, President Biden said Hamas sought to annihilate Israel's democracy. The president also stressed the urgency of getting relief to Palestinian civilians in Gaza who lack food, water, and medicine, and they need as much help as they can get to. The U.S. Department of State has issued a very rare worldwide caution alert urging any American who is overseas to exercise increased caution due to increased tensions in various locations around the world. The Israeli defense minister has told troops gathering at the Gaza border that they would soon see the Palestinian enclave from inside, suggesting an expected ground invasion with the aim of annihilating Hamas could be nearing. A U.S. Navy warship intercepted 3 cruise missiles and several drones launched by the Iranian-aligned Houthi movement from Yemen, potentially toward Israel. Washington is on heightened alert for activity by Iranian-backed groups as regional tensions soared during the Israel-Hamas war. My gosh. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration has taken a momentous step toward banning menthol cigarettes, banning flavored cigars, proposing a rule that public health experts say could save hundreds of thousands of lives a year. Christian Wild from myheartbook.com is with us here. Christian, what do you think of this one?
Well, George, according to the FDA, smoking, and I did not know this, smoking is still the number one cause of preventable death in America.
Wow.
Unlike 10 years ago, today, George, we seldom see someone smoking, at least in public. Now, 2 states, Massachusetts and California, had decided on their own to not wait for the final pending FDA approval on a smoking regulations ban. And the 2 states have implemented the ban on their own to protect their children. Now, the American Lung Association reported that this ban may be the most important action the agency has taken in the 14 years since it was given the authority to regulate tobacco use in protecting our children. Orlando Richardson, who was the president and CEO for Tobacco Free Children, said it this way, George. She said, once the ban is implemented, it will protect our kids from tobacco addiction, advanced health decline, and save hundreds of thousands of lives. Now, there is some good news regarding smoking in general. The CDC told us last year that smoking in the country had reached an all-time low. Now, George, you remember a few years ago we'd walk into a nightclub or a restaurant, everybody was smoking, you could barely see across the room.
That's right.
It isn't that way anymore. You have a good evening, my friend.
All right. MyHeartBook.com is Christian's website. I saw a little clip on YouTube today of Joey Bishop, the late Joey Bishop, filling in for the late Johnny Carson. And Joey had a cigarette in his hand, and he introduced his 2 guests, Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra, who came out with cigarettes in their hand. All 3 of them were sitting on the Tonight Show set, smoking away. My gosh, how times have changed. China and the U.S. are locked into a race to develop new weapons controlled by artificial intelligence, a battle that could determine the world's balance of power. How about that? Kevin Randall has, for more than 45-plus years, studied UFO phenomenon in all its various incarnations and is with us with his weekly UFO report today. Hey, Kevin.
Hi, George. How's it going?
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Well, about an hour ago, I learned that just Tuesday, the DOD said they had 270 new UAP reports, and they gave this information to Congress, and they said those reports came in between August 30th and April 30th of this year. None confirmed as foreign, which would rule out, of course, extraterrestrial as well, and that we've heard the same sort of thing for about 75 years. there's just no evidence of extraterrestrial presence or any threat to national security. But it seems that nearly everyone in the UFO community is talking about disclosure, and most seem to think that we are on the brink of learning what the government knows about UFOs, which they now insist on calling UAP. There are some of us who believe that we are seeing an implementation of a plan outlined by the CIA-sponsored Robertson Panel in 1953. In other words, a plan that was intended to reduce, if not eliminate, interest in UFOs. Don Ecker, a fellow Vietnam veteran and former police officer, and one-time director of research and media liaison for UFO Magazine, which was one of the best UFO-oriented publications, has produced an analysis of the current situation, suggesting that disclosure is not close at hand and may never come if it is left up to the federal government. In his analysis, Ecker outlines that he sees the duplicity of the government and in the hiding of evidence that so many of us wish to see. Ecker mentions, for example, some 22 years ago, after the last moonlighting, actually some 22 years after the last moonlighting, the DoD and NASA launched the Clementine mission to fly by an asteroid and to map the moon. During the mission, 2.5 million photographs were taken. Ecker reported, and I quote, "I contacted and spoke to the assistant director of Clementine, who informed me that all Clementine's photographs were beamed to a separate department inside the mission quarters, and unless you held the proper security clearance, the photographs were classified," end quote. Makes you wonder what might have been in those photographs.
That's right.
Ecker concludes, and I quote again, "The original purpose of this paper was to explore whether we might be on the verge of a mass public disclosure of the reality of the UFO phenomena, or at least in the very near future. I must answer this speculative desire with a resounding no," end quote. For those interested, I put Ecker's paper up on my blog with his permission to, of course, publish it. As I've said, I'm always a bit suspicious of abduction cases, given the nature of most of them. Some are intriguing because the testimony of the witnesses and the suggestion of independent corroboration. On April 5th of this year in McLean, Virginia, one of many witnesses reported that several people saw three triangular-shaped objects that just suddenly appeared. They heard the dogs barking in the distance, and they said their phones and what they described as their music-playing devices shut down. They saw three bright triangular-shaped objects hovering about 500 feet above them. According to the witness, there was a haze or aura around the UFOs, and that it changed color. The UFOs began to descend, and then, according to the witness, everything went black. And again, according to one of the witnesses, as evidenced by the failure of their electronic devices, there were EM effects, animal reactions, and finally missing time. The witness said they found marks on their bodies after that period of missing time. All of these manifestations are indicative of alien abduction. At the moment, I don't have additional information, but I'll continue to search for the updates and report them when I get them here. And that's what we have for tonight, George.
All right, Mr. Randall, we'll talk to you next week, indeed. And, of course, in our highlight reel at coasttocoastam.com, Lex has posted the Department of Defense report on UFOs. It's not very encouraging. They don't talk about the fact that they believe that they're from extraterrestrial sources at all. But go take a look at that story in the highlight reel. That's the first little button at coasttocoastam.com. In a moment, after about 8 or 9 years, Jim Kwik back on the program with his book, Limitless, the expanded edition. Upgrade your brain, learn anything faster, and unlock your exceptional life. Next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you, Jim Kwik with us, an authority in the realm of brain optimization, memory improvement, and accelerated learning. With more than 30 years of experience, he has dedicated his life and career to helping people tap into their brain's full potential. Now, through his teachings, Jim inspires others to unlock their inner genius, empowering them to live a life of greater power, productivity, and purpose. He's also the expert behind the podcast Kwik Brain with Jim Kwik. Jim, welcome back to the program. You were last on with our Lisa Gar about 8.5 years ago.
Oh, my goodness. So good to be back.
Where does the time fly, my friend, huh?
Yeah, this is special times. It's been a minute.
Great job with the Limitless expanded edition, by the way. Well done.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. It's a real labor of love.
You suffered a traumatic brain injury years ago when you were younger. Tell us what happened.
Well, when I was 5 years old, I was in kindergarten class, and there was some commotion outside, some sirens, and as children, we couldn't see outside the window, but we all grabbed our chair and brought it over to the windowsill so we could peer through the glass. And I lost my balance, and I went headfirst into an iron grate radiator, and I was rushed to the emergency room covered in blood. And what happened afterwards was my parents said I was never the same. Before I was very curious, very playful, very energized, but then I became very shut down, and where it really showed up was in school. I had poor focus, poor memory. It took me 3 years longer, George, just to learn how to read.
Oh my God!
And that was very embarrassing, and and very, I had a lot of self-doubt and fears around it. And when I was 9 years old, I remember slowing down the class as I usually did. But this day, particularly, I was being teased pretty harshly for it. And the teacher came to my defense. She pointed to me in front of the whole class and said, "Leave that kid alone. That's the boy with the broken brain." And, you could say that label became my limit. So every single time I did badly in school, which was weekly, I would always say, "Oh, because I have the broken brain." When I wasn't picked for sports, which was all the time, I would say, "Oh, because I have the broken brain." And so you could say my inspiration really was my desperation. At the same time, my grandmother, who really did a lot of my raising, she started showing early signs of Alzheimer's, and she eventually passed when I was 7 years old. So all of this kind of informed, the work I do today in terms of education, brain health, and learning.
How did you get back to where you are today? How did you pull yourself together?
It wasn't easy. Everybody has their own struggles, but I also do believe that with struggles come strengths. I don't know one strong person that had an easy life. For me, it was a mentor at the age of 18 that, I didn't do well in school. When I got, I was lucky enough to get into, local, state university. I took all these classes. I thought being a freshman meant I can make a fresh start. And so I took all these classes and I did worse. And I was ready to quit because, my family didn't have the money for me to really go to school. I didn't want to be wasted. And so when I was telling that to a friend, my friend's like, that's a big decision. Before you decide that you're going to quit school and tell your family, why don't you come home with me this weekend? I'm going to visit my family and get some perspective. So I agreed to go, and family's pretty well off, different than how I grew up. But the father walks me around his property and before dinner by the water and asked me a very innocent question, which is the worst question you could ask me at this time. He says, "Jim, how's school?" Oh. And I just broke down. I started bawling in front of this complete stranger. I tell him my whole story and how I had my broken brain and I just can't learn like everybody else. I'm really stupid, and I'm going to quit school. And he's like, why are you? And then he says, "Why are you in school? What do you want to be, do, have, share?" And I honestly didn't know, George. And nobody's ever asked me that question. It's just something people, I thought that's what people do, is go to school and get a job. And so he asked me to write down my dreams, and nobody's ever asked me to do that before. He takes out a piece of paper, and I start going through the exercise very tentatively. And after a while, I have a couple pages full of goals and dreams, and I start folding up the sheets to put it into my pocket, thinking this exercise is over. And he grabs it right out of my hand, and he starts to read my bucket list, my dream list. And I'm freaking out. I'm 18 years old, very insecure, and obviously this person's pretty successful, and he's looking at my dreams, which I haven't shared with anybody. And when he's done, he looks at me, George, and he says, "Jim, you are this close to everything on this list." And he spreads his index fingers about a foot apart. And I'm thinking, are you kidding me? There's no way. Give me 10 lifetimes, I'm not going to crack this list. Mm-hmm. And he takes his index fingers and he puts them to the side of my head, so my head is in between his fingers, and kind of implying that my brain is the key. And he takes me into a room at his home that I've never seen before. It's wall-to-wall, ceiling to floor, covered in books. And I'm a poor reader. I've never, it's like being in a room full of snakes. I'm very intimidated. But what makes it worse is he starts grabbing snakes and handing them to me. And I start looking at these titles of books, and there are these biographies of some incredible women and men in history, and some very early personal growth books like Norman Vincent Peale, The Power of Positive Thinking, the Power of the Subconscious Mind, and all these, Dale Carnegie, right? And he says, Jim, leaders are readers. So I want you to read one book a week. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I just told you, I'm a very poor learner and I have all this schoolwork. When I said schoolwork, he says, Jim, don't let school get in the way of your education. The Mark Twain quote. And I was like,
right.
That makes sense, but I still can't promise to read all these books. And very smart man. He reaches into his pocket and he takes out my list of goals and dreams, and he starts reading it line by line. And it's hard to describe, but just hearing your goals or intentions and dreams in somebody else's voice, kind of incanted into the universe, that's with my mind, in my spirit, something fierce. And honestly, a lot of the things on that list were things I wanted to do for my family, things they could never afford to do for themselves. And so with that extra leverage, I agreed to read one book a week. Fast forward, I'm back at school, and I have a pile of books I have to read for midterms and a pile of books I promised to read. I already couldn't get through pile A. So I don't have time. So what do? I don't eat. I don't sleep. I don't work out. I don't socialize. I just live in the library for weeks. And one night at 2 o'clock in the morning, I pass out. I fall down a flight of stairs in the library, hit my head again. And I wake up 2 days later in the hospital. And at this point, I'm down to about 117 pounds. I had lost all this weight, very malnourished, dehydrated, hooked up to all these IVs. And I thought there has to be a better way. And it was the darkest time of my life. When I had that thought, the nurse came in with a mug of tea, and on it was a picture of a genius, Albert Einstein, the opposite of, what I thought I was. And on it was a quote, and I think, listeners would appreciate it, that the same level of thinking that has created your problem won't solve your problem. And it made me ask a new question, like, what's my problem? Well, I have a broken brain. I'm a very slow learner. I was like, whoa, how do I think differently about it? Like, maybe I could, fix my brain. Maybe I can learn how to learn better. And I pick up a course bulletin thinking that the classes would help me. And I went through hundreds of classes looking at, classes to take next semester. And they were all classes on what to learn: math, history, science, Spanish. But there were zero classes on how to learn it. There's no classes on focus or remembering or any of those topics. So I set my studies aside and I started studying these books about the power of the mind and other things. And within 60 days, I studied speed reading and ancient mnemonics. I wanted to know, what did the ancient Greeks do when there were no printing presses? How did they remember things? And 60 days into it, 2 months, a light switch flipped on, and I started to understand things for the very first time in my life. I started to have this incredible laser focus, started retaining information, and my grades shot up. But along with it, so did my confidence, and so did other areas of my life. The reason I'm on this conversation with you now, 32 years later, is I started to tutor, and one of my very first students, she read 30 books in 30 days.
Wow!
Not skim or scan, but really read them. And I wanted to find out not how. I know exactly how. I taught her, but I wanted to know why, what her motivation was. And I found out her mother was dying of terminal cancer, was given just 2 months to live, and the books she was reading were books to save her mom's life. And I wished her luck. 6 months goes by, I get a call, and this young lady is crying hysterically. And when she stops, I find out they're tears of joy. And her mother not only survived, but is really getting better. Doctors don't know how or why. They called it a miracle. But her mother attributed 100% to the great advice she got from her daughter, who learned it from all these books. And in that moment, I realized that if knowledge is power, then learning is our superpower. And it's a superpower we all have. And I've been teaching this for the past 3 decades. And, my life is really, my mission is to build better, brighter brains. No brain left behind.
Jim, hold on with us. We're going to come up to a break in a minute. We'll come back and talk about the Limitless Expanded Edition And the original Limitless came out a couple of years ago. We'll talk about how that developed, and we'll go into some of the processes. Next hour, we'll take calls with you. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you, Jim Kwik with us. His book is called Limitless, the Expanded Edition. Tell me about the title, Jim, Limitless.
Yeah, so Limitless is an owner's manual for our brain. Our brain, when we're talking about space, this is the space I'm talking about is between our ears. We upgrade, to think about technology and, we have autonomous electric cars and spaceships that are going to Mars, but our vehicle of choice often when it comes to learning is like a horse and buggy, a horse and carriage. So Limitless, upgrade your brain, learn anything faster, unlock your exceptional life. The expanded edition is really, it's not about being perfect. It's about advancing and progressing beyond what you currently believe is possible. And we've discovered more about the human brain more in the past 20 years than the previous 2,000 years combined. And what we found is we're grossly underestimating our own capabilities, regardless of your age, your background, your career, education level, financial situation, gender history, IQ. So much more potential inside. It's just we're not shown how to be able to access it. And that's why I wrote this book.
You talk about the 7 lies of learning. Tell me about that, and then we'll get into these 7.
Sure. So a big part of what holds us back is our mindset, the set of assumptions and attitudes about something. So someone could learn a great method on, let's say, making money, but if their mindset is, I don't deserve it, or I have to hurt people in order to be able to, access that, then you're probably still going to be stuck, in that area. So all behavior is belief-driven. And so for me, a lie stands for a limited idea entertained. It's not true. It's just something we're giving energy to. So, to be able to unlimit yourself, you have to address these lies. So for example, one of them is intelligence is fixed, right? It's one of those things where people believe that somehow your potential is fixed or your memory is fixed, like your shoe size. Mm-hmm. And that's absolutely not true. But the problem is if you believe it's true, if you believe you can or can't, either way you're right? Henry Ford said that. But the truth is, it's not how smart you are, it's how are you smart. There are multiple types of intelligence. Howard Gardner, talked about this at researched this at Harvard University. So like so many things, intelligence is a combination of attitudes and actions, and it's really dependent on context. A better belief is that intelligence is fluid. I talk about in my work, we created a brain quiz that hundreds of thousands of people have gone through that talks about 4 different brain types. And I modeled it after elephants and dolphins and owls and cheetahs. It's just an illustration that, we are smarter than we think. Another lie that some people believe is that we only use 10% of our brains. And that's,
I hear that a lot.
Yeah, it's something that we've all heard this myth. Some of us heard it the first time in a classroom. Some of us heard it from maybe a friend. Some of us heard it through media, maybe a documentary, a TV show. And it's not true. In actuality, we use 100% of our brain, just like we use 100% of our body, right? It's just some people use it differently, more effectively or more efficiently than others. So the more the truth is that you have all the power of your brain. It's available to you, and it's available to you now. The utopia that each of us, in these movies and television shows that depicts, it's already possible, for us. And while we use all our brains, some people use their brain better than others. Just as, most people use 100% of their body. There are some bodies that are faster, that are stronger, that are more flexible, that are more energized than others. And the key is to learn how to use your brain effectively and efficiency, as possibly as you can, right? And that's why I wrote the book. A new belief could be, instead of, that use 10%, is like, I am learning how to use my whole brain in the best ways possible. Another lie is mistakes are failures. That's something I think a lot of people unconsciously believe. And, it's my belief that could hold you back, because you're not going to do things if you're scared of, making mistakes. I think we make mistakes, but mistakes don't have to make us. that mistakes, that there's no failure. There's only failure to learn something.
As long as you learn from your mistakes, it's worthwhile to try, isn't it?
Yeah, I believe that, George. Just a lot of people think, failure is the opposite of success, and I think failure is part of success, right? And so I feel like getting the feedback is the breakfast of champions. So, and it's interesting with children, like we have a newborn, 9 months, and, he's like learning how to crawl and propping himself up. And, if people fall, like children fall, they'll fall hundreds of times and they always get back up. But sometimes as adults, we could try something. We take a salsa class or a coding class or something, and we don't do well at it the first time, which, is normal, and we just stop, right? Because we don't want to look bad. And so I think there's no such thing as failure. There's only failure to learn something. And another lie that I think is pervasive in the performance space or self-improvement space is that knowledge is power. Like, we've all heard the phrase "knowledge is power," and I don't think it's really accurate. I think knowledge has the potential to be power, and it only becomes power when we utilize it. So many people know stuff, but they're not, utilizing that information. So I think knowledge times action is power. And so, these kind of lies, it's nice to make it more conscious as opposed to unconscious, because in order to change anything, you need a level of self-awareness, right? You need to be you can't change something unless you know that it needs to be changed and you recognize that. So in the book, we talk about some of the lies of learning and then how to be able to reframe them and, to take care of your mindset. I believe your brain is this incredible supercomputer, and your self-talk is the program that will run. So if you tell yourself, I'm not good at, remembering people's names, you will not remember the name of the next person you meet because you program your supercomputer not to.
Exactly.
Exactly. If people truly understood, George, like how powerful their mind is, they probably wouldn't say or think something they didn't want to be true. And that's not to say that you have one negative thought and it ruins your life any more than eating that donut will ruin your life. But if you eat that donut dozens of times in a day, every single day, there will be an effect. And so I just want to remind people that your thoughts matter, and you don't have to believe everything that you think.
Lie number 5 is learning new things is very difficult.
Yeah, I think some people stop. The two challenges is where we see, and we have students in every country in the world in our online, Accelerated Learning Academy for our speed reading memory programs. We see the biggest decline usually when people in their cognitive performance, when people graduate school, because somehow they associate that their education is done, so is their learning, right? They've learned everything that they need to learn. And then when people retire, because often when people retire, they stop using their brain, actively, and unfortunately their bodies usually aren't that far behind. So instead of believing that, learning new things is difficult, it can be, certainly. Sometimes it's hard to learn new things, but that's where you grow, right? When if someone is exercising, it's the novelty and the demand that you have on your muscles that force it to adapt. And same thing with learning. Sometimes it is hard to learn new things, but what's more accurate is to understand that learning is a set of methods. It's a process, and you can certainly do it easier once you know how to learn, right? My book, Limitless, The Expanded, is all about meta-learning. Meta-learning is the science and the art of learning how to learn. When you learn new ways on how to learn, the challenge of learning new things, it actually could be fun. It can actually get easier and certainly more enjoyable. Line number 6 is one talking about criticism, that the criticism of other people matters, because people over-index how important other people's opinions are, and I spent a lot of time at senior centers, maybe because I lost my grandparents at an early age, and I help them to improve their memory, polish off their memory. And I also hear so many nuggets of wisdom and insights. I also hear a lot of regret, and I just want to remind listeners that when we're taking our final breaths, in those moments, none of other people's opinions or their expectations will have mattered to us. Well, what will mattered is, what was most important. Maybe how you laughed and how you learned and how you loved and how you lived. I really think, and you just to frame it in a different way, I don't think we should take criticism from people we wouldn't take advice from. Maybe that could help reframe it for people. The new belief is something like, it's not your job to like, love, or respect me. It's mine, right? And so, I feel like a lot of people are limited. They limit themselves because they're afraid of what people will think. So I just like to put some healthy dose of perspective there. And then the seventh lie is that, and this is something I think a lot of people buy into, is that genius is born. You're either born with, genius or you're not.
It's developed, isn't it?
Yeah, I really think that genius is built, more than anything. That genius leaves clues, and there's always a method behind what looks like magic. And that's been the nature of my work. When I perform in front of audiences, and I could be in front of 250,000 people total in a year. I travel a lot. I could be on 3 continents in a week. And if there's time, I'll do these demonstrations where I'll have like 100 people stand up in an audience and pass around a microphone and introduce themselves. And I will recite all of their names from memory.
You do that? Wow.
I do that, yeah. Or an audience, I just got out of a program at Google. So I'm here in Northern California right now, traveling on tour. And, and they'll challenge me. They'll give me 50 or 100-digit number, and I'll recall them forwards and backwards, or 100 random words. But I always tell people, I don't do this to impress you. I do this to express to you what's possible. Because the truth is, again, we could all do this. We just weren't taught. There was no class called memory. They teach you 3 R's in school: reading, writing, arithmetic. But what about retention, right? Socrates said learning is remembering. And so, I feel like if you go to somebody and say, hey, play the ukulele, that'd be ludicrous if people have never taken a class. Well, going to somebody like a child or one of your coworkers and saying, focus, study, they've never taken classes on that. So I truly believe that genius is not so much born, but it's built. It's made through deep practice, like anything else.
And what about the possibility of brain foods? What are some of the best?
I think the whole area of science, I do a whole chapter on the best foods you could eat for your brain health.
You like guacamole, don't you?
I really do. Avocados, the monounsaturated fat, is good for the brain. This is a whole area of science called neuronutrition. Some of my favorite ones, and I'll give you everyone a memory aid on how to do this so we can make just into a little memory masterclass. Some of my favorites that are researched to be neuroprotective, avocados, blueberries. I like to call them brain berries. The antioxidants are very good for your brain. Broccoli, the sulforaphane in there is very good for your brain. The fourth one is olive oil. We hear a lot about Mediterranean diet. Mm-hmm. It's very neuroprotective. If your diet allows, eggs are like nature's multivitamin. The choline in eggs is very good for cognitive health and performance. Green leafy vegetables like kale and spinach is good for the brain. Your brain is mostly fat, so that's where you get the omega-3s or the DHAs, like from fish. You always hear about eating wild salmon or sardines. Those are definitely brain foods. I would add turmeric. They're curcumin.
Oh, yeah. I take that every day. Every day.
Yeah, so good for you, George. It's anti-inflammatory. Some people will take the turmeric and mix it with some almond milk and maybe a little bit of pepper and just make like some kind of golden milk for themselves. Walnuts are very good for the brain, high in vitamin E, neuroprotective. Walnuts, interesting, they look like a human brain.
They do. You're right.
Yeah. It's something like a little memory aid. Like, it's interesting. Certain foods support the organ that they look like. If you cut a tomato in half, it has 4 chambers, and tomatoes are good for the heart, right? And these are kind of not based, these are more memory, kind of associations. If you cut a carrot and it looks like the human eye, and they say carrots are good for the eye, and so on. And then finally, the 10th one is dark chocolate. Not milk chocolate, not high sugar, but dark chocolate is very good for the brain also as well. What's good for your mood is generally good for your mind. So, these are 10 foods, and you could take a bunch of them, even throw it into a blender and make a brain power smoothie. The avocados, the green leafy vegetables, the chocolate powder maybe, some berries. Oh, I probably wouldn't put the fish in there.
Not in the berries.
Yeah, but what you eat matters, especially for your gray matter.
Before we had the internet going, Jim, I had a friend of mine who had a poor memory, and she saw a television commercial for a kit which would improve your memory, except she forgot the toll-free number.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, I believe, 2 of the most costly words sometimes in life or in our work are I forgot. I mean, think about the consequences of saying, I forgot to do it, I forgot to bring it, I forgot what I was going to say, I forgot what they said, I forgot to go to that meeting, I forgot that person's name. I mean, it just goes on and on. Every time we have those lapses, we could lose time, we could, compromise a relationship. But on the other side, memory can make you the money, certainly, because the faster you can learn, the faster you can earn, because knowledge is not only power, knowledge is profit today. Most people listening, it's not like it was hundreds of years ago, agricultural age, or we're working on assembly lines where it's more brute strength. Today it's brain strength, right? It's not your muscle power, it's our mind power. And again, the faster you can learn, the faster you can earn. If you can remember client information or product information, get a speech without notes, learn another language, improve your vocabulary, remember what you read. I mean, all of these are real assets. And again, it's everybody, regardless of your age and stage of life, can do it. They just need a guidebook, right? And your brain is amazing, right? It only weighs about 3 pounds, but it is the most intricate and one of the most extraordinary things in the entire universe. I mean, imagine 86 billion neurons, and each of these neurons could connect up to 10,000 other neurons. If you tried to count each connection, you'd be counting for 3 million years. I mean, it's like having the entire internet inside your head.
Stay with us, Jim. We're going to take a short break. We're going to chat more about your work, Limitless, and we'll take calls in just a moment.